Hi, I'm Holly Scott Gardner, a disability rights advocate with a particular interest in equalities within the education system and healthcare policy and its impact on disabled people. I'm going to talk to you today about digital accessibility and producing accessible content for social media. I'm so glad that I'm able to join you and share my experiences. I started producing social media content when I was 17 and I started writing a blog. Since then, my content has reached thousands of people across the world. It's really important to me that my own content's accessible because I'm a blind person who relies on accessibility features myself, but also because I want other disabled people to be able to engage with what I do. Hopefully, by the end of my presentation, you'll have some ideas on how to make your own social media content more accessible. It's really important that before we start, we define what do we mean by accessibility. Typically, accessibility means to be able to use or obtain something easily. However, when we talk about digital accessibility, we're typically referring to the design of products and services so that disabled people can use them. Now, in the realm of digital accessibility, these products and services exist online. It's also useful to establish why we need our social media to be accessible. I can think of two really great reasons for this, though there are absolutely more. Firstly, if you're designing a campaign and you want people to engage with it, you can't exclude a whole group of people. When your content isn't accessible, a blind person won't be able to engage with it at all, so your campaign will unfortunately perpetuate existing systems which exclude disabled people. Secondly, when we post something on social media, we want other people to join in. It's inherently social, it's in the name. So even if what you're posting is a picture of your cat or a funny meme that you saw, you have this hope that other people are going to respond, that it will draw you closer to people. If your content isn't accessible, again, a blind person's not going to engage with you, and you lose out on potentially great contact. As a blind person, I access the computer and my smartphone slightly differently from sighted people. There are two main pieces of technology that blind people use to access content online: screen readers and braille displays. Some blind people also use magnification software. A screen reader essentially does what it says. It reads out what's on the screen. I navigate my computer using the keyboard rather than a mouse, so all the navigation I do is done completely non-visually, and my screen reader reads out the various different controls and text that I encounter. Braille displays do something very similar, except instead of speech output, the output is braille. These are also specific pieces of hardware rather than software we load onto our computer. Many blind people will just use screen readers. Some will use a screen reader in conjunction with a braille display, and others, particularly deafblind people, won't use speech output, they will exclusively use braille output. Smartphones can be used similarly. Many smartphones now, such as iPhones and Android devices, have built-in screen readers. This means that we're not having to buy or download a specific piece of software, it comes with the phone. We can navigate using the touchscreen, however some of the gestures are slightly different, and we can also pair a smartphone with our braille display for braille output and input as well. Often when I talk to people about designing accessible content for social media, they'll ask me, but are there really many blind people online? The answer is yes. Lots and lots of blind people are using the internet, and we're using all different social media platforms. You might look at a platform like Instagram and think, but surely no blind people use this, it's all pictures. But there are lots of us on there. Whether the person's totally blind or has some useful vision, it can involve some creativity to make this content accessible to us, but we're still very much active and we really want to be involved. I'm going to talk you through various different types of content you might be posting on social media and how each of these can be made to be more accessible for blind screen reader users, starting with videos. Videos are a great way of engaging with people. Whether you're wanting to show live footage of something that's happening or create a campaign trailer, it's a really amazing way of connecting with your audience, but it's also important that your entire audience can join in. When you make a video, it's important to describe what's happening, particularly if you're at an event live. For example, you might talk about the size of the crowd, what people are doing, what you can see going on. Maybe there's a particular point of action that you want to draw attention to, so it would be good to describe that. This benefits everyone, not just blind people. Audio description does exist as a specific service for blind people, and it adds extra descriptive details to an existing video. However, you can also naturally build in audio description into your content, and this is something I really like to do. I'm a blind person, so I don't observe events the same way everyone else does, even when I'm there in person. So I might say things like, I can hear a large crowd of people, or off to my right, I can hear an announcement about. This is an amazing way of building in audio description, because what you could say is something like, off to my right there are several vehicles, and then describe what they look like. This is good for sighted people because it helps them stay in the moment, but it's also a great way of incorporating audio description for the blind into your content. Having text pop up on the screen is another useful way to engage your audience. You might include things like phone numbers, email addresses, and other forms of contact details. But it's really important to read these out loud so that everyone can access them, particularly if you're providing a service. For example, you might be advertising a helpline, but if the only way the number appears is on screen and you don't read it out, no blind person will be able to find that information. Similarly, it's important to steer clear of videos that only contain music and photos. Whilst these are a really nice way of showcasing a successful event, all a blind person's going to know is that there's some music playing. We won't know what the pictures are, what the event's even for, and what you're trying to tell us. So what you can do is provide a voiceover to that video which describes what's happening on screen. It's very important that videos are captioned so that deaf people can access them. However, it's extremely useful to provide a text transcript of video content. Whilst it can be tempting to embed captions into the video, it does mean this is almost impossible for deaf-blind people to access them. If you include a text transcript, a person can read through that transcript at their own pace, which benefits all kinds of people. I did mention deaf-blind people, but it also benefits dyslexic people who may not be able to read as quickly. It sounds like making your videos accessible involves a lot of work, but actually, many of these things can be incorporated fairly easily. Just become more talkative when you're filming and ensure that you're producing transcripts in multiple formats, and you're pretty much covered. Soon it will become second nature. Now let's talk about images and how we can make them accessible on social media. I'm going to talk about two kinds of images that you might be posting. Firstly, people and objects, and secondly, images of data such as charts and graphs. Let's start by talking about people and objects. You can add alt text to images posted on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and on the web. Alt, or alternative text, is text which is read out by a screen reader and describes what's in the image. You write the text yourself and post it to these platforms. This text isn't seen by people who aren't using a screen reader, so it does make it less disruptive. However, it's also important to acknowledge that there are people who benefit from image descriptions who aren't screen reader users. Some people really struggle to process and interpret what's happening in an image, so they'd benefit from alt text and descriptions of photos, but they aren't actually blind. What you can do in this situation is include alt text for the photo, but also write an image description in the body of the post. This is particularly easy to do on Facebook and Instagram where there isn't such a severe character limit. On somewhere like Twitter, where you're constrained to 280 characters, you might want to just note that a more detailed description can be found further down the thread. Alt text should describe the photo in enough detail so that a blind person can understand the context of the photo and the point of why you're posting it. For example, you wouldn't say image of person, but you would say who the person is, if known, what they look like, what they're doing in the photo, any other objects that are present, and any text that appears. You also wouldn't say image of poster, but you might say a poster advertising and then include the name of the event, the location, the time, and any other information that's present. Alt text can also be fun if you really embrace it. Some people write amazing creative descriptions, but if that feels like too much pressure, it's okay just to stick to the main points of the photo. You don't have to get too creative if you don't want to. Graphical representations of data are also very, very important, particularly at the moment when we're dealing with a global pandemic. It's important to include multiple ways of displaying data, for example charts and graphs, but also the raw data itself. When you write alt text for charts and graphs, you may not be able to include all the information, but you can write out the overall trend. Let's talk about a graph that showed the progression of coronavirus globally. You might not be able to include in your alt text description every single specific piece of data that you can gather from that image. It would just take too long. But what you can do is describe the overall trend, which after all is what you're hoping people will pick up on when you post the picture on social media. However, if possible, it's great if you can link to that raw data so that a blind person can get access to it too. Infographics are also a valuable way of displaying information, however, they're notoriously inaccessible. These tend to be used mostly on websites, so it's good to write out the text and any images that are shown in this. You can just write it below the picture so that people who would benefit from a text description can scroll down and find it. Finally, I'm going to talk about how we actually write our posts and ways in which we can inadvertently exclude people. Hashtags are a great way of sharing campaigns and joining in with events. It's really important that when you write a hashtag that includes multiple words, you capitalize the first letter of each word. Otherwise, a blind person using a screen reader will hear the hashtag as one entire word. When all the words are kind of smooshed together, it makes it really difficult to hear. If you capitalize the first letter of each word, our screen reader will read out the hashtag correctly. Avoiding stylized text in your posts or in your username is also really important. While this can look nice, it's often read out in a really difficult way by screen readers, making it almost impossible for a blind person to understand what's going on. It can also be really difficult for people with dyslexia and other reading disabilities to actually read. Using emojis is also another great way in which we can connect with people and get our point across. However, sometimes we can make our posts very inaccessible through using them. One thing I often see people do is the use of an emoji between each word. I strongly encourage you avoid this if possible. I often see this with the clapping hands emoji, and my screen reader would read this out like this. Don't clapping hands with medium skin tone. Use clapping hands with medium skin tone. And clapping hands with medium skin tone. Emoji clapping hands with medium skin tone, etc. It makes it almost impossible for me to understand what you're trying to say. These are really simple ways that we can make our posts more accessible, and whilst everything I've described might sound very overwhelming, it isn't once you get used to it. It's also important to know that the blind community will pick up on whether you're trying or not. Sometimes you're going to forget, sometimes I forget, and I benefit from these things, so it happens to all of us. But if you're putting in the effort, and if you're asking for help when you're struggling, we'll really appreciate that. Ultimately, what we want to see is people trying to make their campaigns and content more accessible to us. The good news is that after a while these things really do become second nature, and you can start to embrace them and really enjoy them. It becomes less of a chore and more fun. I haven't included specific instructions for posting alt text on different platforms, and I've done this for a reason. Sometimes the social media platforms will update the ways in which you post alt text, so I don't want to give you information that could quite soon be out of date. However, there is really comprehensive information on all of the social media platforms' help pages regarding alt text. So if you look at those, they will describe specifically how to do it and it will be up to date. Also, feel free to reach out to me on any social media platform and I'd be more than happy to help you. Ultimately, it's about building a better, more inclusive world together.